Hero or villain? That's the question that really faces us when we read Parashat Pinchas. Although this week's Parashat is named for Pinchas, the real action which Pinchas is known for actually took place last week, at the end of Parashat Balak. If you don't remember, the story is that after the incident with Balak and Balaam and this ridiculous, fanciful, hilarious incident, in which Balaam tries to curse the Israelites but ends up blessing them, Pinchas enters the scene, described as Aaron's grandson, because the people have once more gone astray. They've begun worshipping some entity we know as Baal Peor, probably an incarnation of the Canaanite god Baal, and clearly this version of Baal, the Baal of Peor, is very associated with sexuality, because what's described as a kind of orgiastic interaction with the local women, and the result is absolute madness and chaos. What happens from that is that God decides once more to unleash a plague upon the people, something which, unfortunately, we've become quite accustomed to in the last few weeks of the Book of Numbers. And then Pinchas enters the scene as someone who is inspired by his zeal for God. He picks up his spear and he thrusts it through two people who are probably in the middle of copulating, one of whom is Zimri, one of the chieftains of one of the tribes of Israel, and his lover Cosbi, who's one of the princesses of the tribes of Midian. This powerful image of Pinchas murdering two people in especially such a vulnerable position is how the parsha ends last week. And we're left thinking, what do we make of this? Who is this guy? Is he a hero or a villain? Commentators are divided, as usual. Most tend to think that Pinchas is a hero. And what the rabbis have mostly done in response is try to figure out how Pinchas is a hero. How can we understand what he's doing as a heroic action? Some say it was because he was trying to save people's lives. He was so inspired by his zeal that actually he realized that if he didn't do something, the plague would hurt many more people. So he chose in a somewhat utilitarian fashion to kill two rather than to allow thousands to be killed by the plague. If that's true, he was right, because the plague stops after his action. And God, in the beginning of our parasha this week, seems to verify that thinking, to say that if it weren't for Pinchas, the plague would have spread further. Some see Pinchas as a fundamentalist, a religious extremist, someone who can't tolerate the inclusion of non-Israelite women into the community around him, and so he reacts and responds with violence, and maybe even hatred. These two things seem totally at odds, and honestly, it's hard to tell. It's hard to know what to make of Pinchas. Who is he, really, and what's he all about? One tradition, which I think actually is very helpful, although it's very strange, is that of the Zohar. When the Zohar looks at Pinchas, it looks in particular, as it often does, on something very specific, which is that when Pinchas is described at the beginning of our parsha this week, he's described as Ben Elazar, Ben Aharon. So it's pretty straightforward to read that as the son of Elazar, who is the son of Aharon, meaning that Pinchas is Elazar's son and Aharon's grandson. But the Zohar thinks that language is strange. It is perhaps a bit awkward, but Torah is often awkward. But it looks in particular detail at the repetition of Ben, of son, and it says as a result that this is evidence that Pinchas is a reincarnation of his uncles. A while back now, we saw in Shmini the death of Aaron's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, and the two surviving sons, Elazar and Itamar, become the inheritors of the priesthood. And of course, Elazar is the elder and is the designated heir. Already in our parasha, we can see that since Aharon has died, Elazar has taken over his role, and Pinchas is presumably the next person in line. But what if he was actually more than just the son of Elazar, the son of Aharon? We take the Zohar's idea seriously that Pinchas was in fact the reincarnation of Nadav and Avihu. It changes the story a little bit. These were two young men who died because God's anger burst out against them, seemingly without reason. So they would be, of all people, ones who really understood the danger of encountering God and encountering God's wrath. But it also helps us to understand a little bit about what reincarnation might add to the story because of what the Zohar believes reincarnation means. For the Zohar, the idea of reincarnation, which they call Gilgulin, or cycles, recycles, is actually a way of fixing something that was wrong before. So if someone dies without being perfectly righteous, which, by the way, is probably all of us, then their soul returns. And when it returns into the body of someone who's, consciously or not, given the task of improving upon that soul they were given, making it better, doing things right, fixing it, and building it up. And the Zohar sees Pinchas as that person, that he's building upon a structure which is already there to try and help improve Nadav and Avihu, to rectify, to repair their souls so that they can move on through the world. That's the idea of reincarnation, is that it's somewhat therapeutic. It's a way to restore souls which are fragmented. Zohar says itself in its commentary on Pinchas that it should be compared to a person who builds a beautiful and attractive building. But when they examine the foundation, they see that actually the building is sinking and it's distorted in all directions. So the building is incomplete until he demolishes it and rebuilds it anew. Regarding the building itself, it was fine and beautiful, but regarding the foundation, it was bad and distorted. So it's not called a complete project. It's not called a complete building. That's how the Zohar understands this idea of compound souls, that Pinchas is the building which is built upon a foundation which is weak. The result is something beautiful. It's something which is improved, but it still lies upon something which is not stable. And the result is that it allows us to see Pinchas as a more complex character, not as hero or as villain, but actually as someone which is struggling with the combinatory nature of his soul, of having a weak foundation and a strong building built on top of it. Maybe the zeal, the negative, the passion is actually the part that comes from Nadav and Avihu. Maybe the incident in which they died was one where they actually had so much zeal for God, but they applied it incorrectly. And maybe Pinchas is now using that same zeal in his own life in order to try and apply it in a better way. And it seems he does, because he gets God's endorsement, certainly. But there's also a way in which it's not so clear-cut. That zeal is costly, because it compromises who Pinchas is. Yes, perhaps he took brave action for the sake of everyone's well-being, and certainly for God's commands, but he murdered 2 people in the process. Interestingly, when the Zohar comments further on this, it says, "If one acts zealously for the name of the Blessed Holy One, even though they're not worthy of greatness or deserving of it, they'll surely gain and obtain it." Pinchas did not deserve it at that time, but because he acted zealously for the name of his Lord, he gained all and attained all. All was rectified within him, and he was privileged to serve in the supreme priesthood. From that moment on, the Torah refers to Pinchas as son of Eleazar, son of Aharon, the priest. For he consummated 2, since he acted zealously for the holy name of his Lord, rectifying what had been contorted. It's a fascinating reading of this story because it really flips on its head a lot of our assumptions about who Pinchas is. This idea that the Zohar shares with us, that actually Pinchas didn't deserve all of the things that we read of him when he began, gives a little bit more nuance to the notion of hero or villain. He actually acted improperly at first. He didn't deserve the greatness which was given to him. But although he started out acting improperly, it had proper results. He used his actions to rectify something which was broken inside of him. And although it seems like a hazardous thing to suggest to us as readers, perhaps there's something really powerful about that idea. If we take that seriously, then maybe we aren't heroes or villains in our own lives. Maybe it's more complex. Maybe we too have souls within us that need to be fixed. Maybe we have foundations which are crumbling, but we can build upon them something beautiful, something which enhances the building altogether, and which shores up the foundations underneath. And although we might not feel that we begin in greatness, if we act correctly, if we make the right choices, we can not only improve our own souls, but we can help to fix all those that we've inherited. And that seems, more than anything, like a good way to be a hero. Shabbat Shalom.